Hey Defenders, let's jump right into deploying our Wazoo architecture. In this video, we will deploy a Wazoo manager and 2 Wazoo agents. I want this series to be hands-on, as I myself learn much faster viewing hands-on demonstrations rather than having someone read straight documentation to me. But enough of that, let's get into it. But first, time for my shameless plug.
If you want to learn more about our company, head on over to opensecure.co. If you would like to hire us for a project, select the Hire Us button at the top of this video. To see firsthand the power of open source technology, take advantage of our interactive demo. Select the demo button and start exploring. Now let's get back to the video.
Last video, we discussed the software that comprises the Wazoo architecture. Now let's get our hands on the software and deploy it ourselves. In this video, we will focus on the first half of the Wazoo deployment, the Wazoo manager and Wazoo agent. Again, the Wazoo agent is responsible for collecting logs from our app servers, web servers, etc., and forwarding them to our Wazoo manager, who analyzes the received logs against a rule set. If the received log matches a rule, an alert is fired. This communication flows through ports 1514 and 1515 TCP that the Wazoo manager is listening on. But that'll all become more familiar as we move along. But enough chatting, let's go ahead and get into it. So, as I mentioned in the previous video, Wazoo has great documentation, and they have done a tremendous job making this install and some of their advanced features as easy and user-friendly as possible. And they also do a great job of displaying all the pieces that make up the Wazoo architecture that we're going to go ahead and cover in this series of videos. So I'm on Wazoo's documentation, and I am at the installation section, and here's where we choose what type of deployment we want to go with. Do we either want an all-in-one deployment, being that the Wazoo manager and Elasticsearch and Kibana run on the same physical server or virtual server in our case, or do we want to split this up to where the Wazoo manager is running on one server and Elasticsearch and Kibana are running on another, or Elasticsearch is running on another server and Kibana is running on another server? Now, the idea behind a more distributed deployment would mean that you can allocate more resources that your servers have available to them to only doing specific jobs. So if I have a lot of Wazoo agents within my environment, I may need a Wazoo manager that has an 8-core CPU, 8 gigs of RAM, and a lot of disk space, which disk space, we'll get into that later. But you want to allocate more disk space if you're limited on that towards your Elasticsearch servers, because those are the guys that are actually storing the logs and retrieving those from Kibana. So I can distribute my Wazoo manager service on to a separate server, and then Elasticsearch and Kibana, I can combine those into one server, or as I just mentioned, we can split those out into 2. In this demonstration, I'll just put Elasticsearch and Kibana on the same server, but these are both in a actual production environment where your network is big and you're receiving logs from a lot of servers. You would want to put up a cluster of Elasticsearch nodes. Elasticsearch is a pretty beefy process. It relies a lot on memory, and so allocating more memory will get you better performance. And allocating memory only to the Elasticsearch process will also yield to give you better performance, but we'll cover that here in the videos coming up. So in this one, like I mentioned, we are only deploying the Wazoo manager and the Wazoo agent, so kind of the first piece of this installation, and we will then go from there. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So like I said, we're doing the distributed deployment, and this is what I would pretty much always recommend, unless you're doing like a lab type of environment or a POC for your employer. Then you could go into an all-in-one deployment. But like I said, as your environment gets bigger and bigger, you're collecting more logs, your servers, your Wazoo manager, Elasticsearch, and Kibana are taking up more resources. You also don't want to have, if all 3 services are running on the same server and all of a sudden that server crashes, You also don't want to have your whole infrastructure go down just because one server crashed. So you want that redundancy, and we'll get more into that later as well. So let's go into the step-by-step installation. As I mentioned, we're going to do a Wazoo single node. So the difference between single node and multi-node cluster, you can also cluster your Wazoo managers. We're going to get into that later. We're going to go over a series of a little more advanced deployment. But for just introducing this to you guys, it'd be easier to just jump into the single node cluster. But in a real environment, real production environment, you would want to take this multi-node cluster. So if a Wazoo manager server were to crash for whatever reason, you're still able to receive logs from your agents and ingest these logs, and so you're never having that downtime, right? Where if you only have one Wazoo manager going, that guy crashes for 24 hours, you're not going to receive logs from your agent for the last 24 hours. So in the unlikely event that you get compromised within that time frame, you're completely blind to what may have happened. But for this instance, we're going to go into a single node cluster, and let's go ahead and start running some commands. So let me log on to what I have allocated as my Wazoo manager. I guess free promo, I guess. I use these Chemotera. We'll go with Chemotera. Infrastructure as a service to spin up my VMs so I can quickly go over demos with you guys and then destroy them, and it's not too much money out of my pocket. So let's go ahead and power this guy on. And I also don't have the benefits of a home lab yet. I'm still in an apartment, so once I move into a home, if the prices ever drop, I will be able to spin up a home lab, which will probably be a series of videos in itself. All right, so it looks like this guy is spinning up, so let's go ahead and jump onto him. I have my public IP address here. I like to use PuTTY as my terminal of choice. So I'll go ahead and paste this guy in, and we'll hit yes, and we will go ahead and log on. And this server here is a CentOS 7 box. I know it's getting end of life, and CentOS end of 8 was short-lived. So please don't grab at me in the comments about that. I am aware. And let's go ahead and log on with password 123. All right, and so now we are on. I don't have many resources allocated to these guys. I just do just for demo purposes. I have about a gig of RAM. And not many CPU. I have two core CPU. So, but that'll be enough for the purpose of this. So let's go back into our documentation. Go ahead and make this a little prettier. And let's just start going through their commands. Like I said, their documentation is great, and it's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty much plug and play, which is nice. And we'll go ahead and grab their repo. So that grabbed, and now let's just run the command, Wazoo manager. And we see that installing, and then we'll hit it with a daemon reload and enable and start. This enable will tell the box, hey, if whenever you reboot for whatever reason, go ahead and start the service upon boot. Copy these other two over, and we'll go ahead and start the service. And going back to our diagram here, so we are focused on this guy here. So this is what we're spinning up here. So it looks like that's started. Let's run a status, make sure that it is running, and that looks healthy and good. As you can see, it also spins up a few processes within it, right? So we have this OSEC auth D, Wazoo DB, OSEC exec D, analysis D, syscheck D, remote D, log collector. And so these are sub-processes that are responsible for some of the advanced features within that were given with the Wazuh manager. So some obvious ones: the log collector, right, is responsible for receiving the logs from the agents. So if this process is down for some reason, and as you can see, it's started them all here, this process is down, we're not able to receive logs correctly from the agents, and we're flying blind at that point. Remote D is another daemon that you can use to run various commands on your Wazuh agents. So once you have this box pretty locked down, you can use the Wazuh manager to run various commands on a Wazuh agent. Say I don't have access to the server easily itself, and I want to truncate a log file or rotate a log file that's building up on a Wazuh agent. I could, pretty much any command you run from that you can run on the operating system, you can tell the Wazuh manager to run on the agent side. So if I wanted to truncate var log messages with just a basic command like that, I can institute this. I can take advantage of this remote D functionality to run this on the Wazuh agent. It's with great power comes a great responsibility. It's a great tool to have, but you do need to make sure your manager is locked down, maybe in a isolated VLAN, is what I would recommend, with only the required ports open, so 1514 and 1515. So if we go ahead and view at what ports are listening on this box, we can see that 1514 is being used by this OSSEC remote D, and then we also have the authentication daemon. So let me go ahead and clear that and load that again so my poorness of Activate Windows gets out of y'all's way. So again, we see the remote D, and this is the port that all logs will be sent on. So we have our authentication D, which is the port that listens for incoming connections. So the Wazuh agent, once we spin this guy up, he'll reach out to the manager on port 1515 and say, hey, I'm trying to connect with you. And this is the program and port that's responsible for that. Once that connection is established, all logs are forwarded to 1514, and any other like the remote commands I was talking about earlier. And then the Wazuh manager also spins up an API, which we will tie into with Kibana when we get there. So that'll be kind of the last piece of this final deployment, but that's what this 55,000 port is looking for here. Let me go ahead and disable firewall in case that's running. That always used to give me issues in the past, especially when I was younger in my career and just kind of really getting hands-on with these tools. I would spin up one of these boxes, get firewall rules in place, and then still wasn't able to connect to, say, 1515, and that's because the local firewall was dropping that connection. So I like to disable it and get it out of the way early, so I'm not scratching my head later down the road. Okay, so we have our Wazuh manager stood up, and now let's get our Wazuh agent stood up as well. So I have dedicated another server to this guy, so let me go ahead and power this guy on. And we'll go ahead and open up this session. We'll go root and password 123. That's not actually the password I'm using. I'm just kidding with you guys. All right, so we have our agent set up. So let's go ahead now and deploy the Wazuh agent software. All right, so we will select the Wazuh agent tab here. We are going to be spinning up a Linux distro. So this guy is CentOS 7 as well, but you can also do this for Debian and a handful of other Linux distributions. Play nicely with the Wazuh agent. So we'll go ahead and select on this installer, and we'll see something similar like we did with the manager. So let's go ahead and import the GPG key, and we will add the repo, and now we install the Wazoo agent. I'll go ahead and add a -y so I don't have to do so later. So then once we install, and when you're getting to a more kind of mass deployment of you want to get this pushed out to a bunch of servers, we'll go over a more kind of advanced installation where you can add some variables to your commands as well. So upon doing the Wazoo agent initial install, I can also say, hey, your Wazoo manager is this guy, and we'll give it an IP address. And so as it's installing the package and required dependencies and everything, and actually installing the Wazoo agent, it'll go ahead and take whatever value IP address you gave, pointing it to which will point to your corresponding Wazoo manager. And so you can handle the installation process as well as the registration process all in one go. So now we've only installed the Wazoo agent, right? So we have to tell it, hey, I want you to talk to this guy. This is the Wazoo manager I want you to register with and to send your logs to. So to do so, we'll need to go into the configuration file for that. So var osec etc osec. So this will be your, let's kind of take it a step back. So this will be your directory where your logs for any troubleshooting you need to do are done. Your configuration will be done here. Any active response features can be done here. We'll get into that later as well. So your var osec directory is where you're going to be doing most of your work for this guy. So I'll go ahead and throw this guy off to the side again, and let's go into etc. And yes, I know I'm using nano, please don't crucify me. And if we go into etc, go here, and we'll go ahead and open the osec.conf. Oh, you don't like me using nano either. Alright, got that installed. Alright, so let's go ahead and open the osec.conf. And once we're in here, this is where we will set many of our settings that we will use. And we also, you see this local file, it's pointing to log files that we're going to forward to the Wazoo manager. But before that, if you see in this section, in this block here, this client block, we have a address and it's asking for a manager IP, right? And so what we're going to do then is give our corresponding IP address of our manager here. So we have a 128.128.241.82. You know, in your own environment, this will probably be a 10.192. You know, whatever private IP block you're using. But we'll go ahead and point to our Wazoo manager, and port is 1514 by default, like we were talking about earlier. So it's going to send logs to 1514. Yes, you could change this to whatever port you want. So if you want to be a little more obscure, I guess, and say someone got into your environment and they're kind of poking around to see, and God forbid they get some packet sniffer or something on the network to where they're seeing traffic go to port 1514. And if they're familiar with Wazoo, that could be a good indication of, they're doing, they're running this host intrusion detection system, and I need to be more careful about what activities, what logs I'm generating as I move about the environment. But that's more advanced topic. And then we have a config profile where we are going ahead with CentOS. As I said, this is a CentOS server, and as part of the package installation, it grabs the distro that you're running. So it populates this automatically, so we don't need to worry about that. For our case, for now, we just really want to worry about pointing it to the right address of the Wazoo manager. All right, so we'll go ahead and save that. and we will run a reload. We will also go ahead and enable this guy, and then we'll go ahead and start him. All right, and so he was now reaching out to the Wazoo manager. So he was reaching out to the Wazoo manager on port 1515 there. I know we saw 1514 within the configuration file, but that's just what we'll send the logs on. To do the authentication, that's sent over to port 1515. And if we look at the status of this guy, we see it's running, so that looks good. And if we tail this osec.log, we can see status of this guy. And we can see now it's starting to go through its, it does a file integrity monitoring on startup. It does a root check on startup. So it's going through that progression. And the Wazoo manager also comes with some binaries that we can run various kind of helpful scripts for debugging or doing the old-fashioned way of authenticating a server, which, like I said, we'll get into more an advanced and easier kind of deployment strategy for that here in a few videos coming up. But if let's go ahead and run the manage agent. Let me see -H to see what options I can do. So let's go ahead and list available agents. So if I do a -L, it looks like we see our guy here. So our Wazoo agent has an ID of 001. This is the host name, or this is the name it's assigning it, and that is usually corresponds to the host name that's given to the box. So if we look at our agent, my host name that I gave this was just Wazoo_agent_Linux. In a production environment, if you have a naming convention of like, prod 123, 1234, whatever your naming convention is for your host names, that's what will populate here. And we have an IP address of any. I like to leave this as any, so if I were to move, this can also be a static value, and it'll populate with whatever IP address is currently assigned to the server. I don't like to leave it at that, because if I need to migrate servers for whatever reason, or if I'm moving them to a new VLAN, something like that, something that would cause their IP address to change, I don't want this agent to become incompatible because it's only expecting this server to have this assigned IP address. So I like to leave it as any, so I have the freedom to kind of move around if need be. And so now we look to be set up. And things look to be healthy. So if we go back into our osec.conf here, we can see, if we kind of scroll down to the bottom, you see this local file. You see these local file blocks. Now, these are log files that I want to send to the Wazoo manager. So if we go into one of these, so like if I start tailing var log messages, we'll be able to see messages that the kernel is logging. And we're sending this log, so anytime this log gets a new line entry, it is sent to the Wazoo manager. And these are sent within the, and I can view these logs as well. Well, yes, I can view the raw logs, but like we mentioned, the Wazoo agent is sending logs to the Wazoo manager, and the Wazoo manager evaluates them against a rule set to then determine if it wants to alert and log that or not. So actually, let's step back one and get into the rule set. So if I go into var osec rule set, and I go into rule, so we also have decoders, and decoders are what kind of breaks the line entries of the log up. By default, there's a ton of decoders, so chances are you probably want to have to build your own decoders. So maybe you have a log file that isn't your normal syslog or isn't your normal JSON file. It's maybe like some weird XML file or something like that. You would need to build a decoder around that so the Wazoo manager could basically parse through that and understand what it's seeing. But if we go into the rules here, these are all the rules that come bundled with the Wazoo manager. And these all come by default, and we also have the ability to add our own rules, which we'll get into later as well. But as you can see, there's a ton of categories here that cover most of your general kind of logs that you want to send over. You know, Cisco, we can do Docker, Jenkins. There's a ton of rules here, which are great, that come pre-populated in that the community and Wazoo build. So these are always growing as well, which is a nice little feature. So if we go into if we tail what we are receiving, so the Wazoo manager, when it gets a log from our agent, evaluates it against our rules, and then it says, okay, I want to log this as an alert. So if I tail it writes these alerts to an alerts.json file. So if we go ahead and tail this, we can see some alerts that we've already received from our Wazoo agent here. You can see nothing really interesting. Let's see if we can manually trigger one of these guys. So let's say I want to log in as like test. And this user is not going to exist on the box, but let's see if we can generate a log. Oh, let's see. There we go. Here. So I attempted to log in as a user test. That user did not exist. And look at the log that we just received. Let me make this a little bigger. So attempt to log in using a non-existent user, right? So that's good. So the Wazoo agent, and let's follow that again. So the Wazoo agent outputs that to a locally on the box. He's writing out to a var log secure, right? And here we go, failed pass. So once I tried that, let's go ahead and do that again. We see a user unknown, and then we also get failed password for invalid user test, right? So locally, that was written to the var log secure file on the agent. The agent, like we saw within the configuration, is configured to forward that file to our Wazoo manager, who then evaluated it against a rule set, saw an entry in the log, failed password for invalid user, and that matched our rule. And we'll get more into that later. But that matched a rule that's on the Wazoo manager, and a rule stating that, oh, hey, I want to alert on this. So I'm going to output that alert to my alerts.json, and we can see that it populates here. And we also get some more kind of metadata around it in terms of the source IP, port, and this is a location of the log where it grabbed this entry from. So that's kind of just a brief example of this, and kind of the power of what you can start to collect in terms of Wazoo. And we saw our local files here. We have the ability to add any other file we want to add. So maybe you have your own homegrown log collection or log writing, right? And it's stored in some location that isn't normal, right? You can go ahead and say it is a type of syslog. Say I'm forwarding it to var log. Please subscribe and slash open secure.log. I can go ahead and state that, and let's go ahead and restart the Wazoo agent. And we can go into our tail our osec.log file, and we will see that it'll tell us that it doesn't exist. Actually, let me not tail it. Let me open it up. And okay, so actually, taking a little step back, we see when we first, after we pointed to the Wazoo manager, we see it negotiating this key, right? So this little block of log here was when the Wazoo agent was reaching out to the manager saying, hey, I'm trying to authenticate with you, let me get a key. You can also password protect this. So within your production environment, you can make this process a little more secure in doing so. And so going down, we see that it then starts to analyze our log files that we have configured there. So if we go down to our last logs here, we see, because this file does not exist, but we can see that, hey, it looked for this log file that we just added, right? This is my own homegrown thing, and I want to analyze and forward these logs to my manager. So let's go ahead and install the Wazoo agent on a Windows box now. So if I go into the Windows installation guide here for the Wazoo agent, I also have a series of commands that we will run to then point to our Wazoo manager and get this agent registered with the manager so we can start collecting logs from the Windows box as well. So let me go ahead and let's get into this Windows box that I already have pulled up here. Let me go grab the package. The best way to do that is just from a web browser. You can also set up a GPO policy that will also do this deployment. So once you get to where a point to where you want to deploy this out to all of your Windows boxes, we can set a GPO policy to where we'll do that automatically, and it'll handle that registration and forwarding process for us. But for now, for this demo, I'll go ahead and just download it from a web browser. Let's see, I just spun this box up, and the first thing I like to do is use Internet Explorer to download Chrome. So we'll go ahead and do that, and I will skip ahead. All right, so we got Chrome downloaded, and let's go ahead and grab the MSI file. So I'll go ahead and go back to the documentation and select the current version. Just if you're looking at the documentation, you can select different release versions here on the side. But we'll go ahead and go into Windows. We will go ahead and go to the Windows, download the Windows installer. So as you can see, we're downloading the MSI down here. Let's go ahead and open and run this guy. Accept the terms. With the Windows, you get a little more user-friendly experience. They have a GUI that comes built in, so it's a little more user-friendly, I guess. So let's go ahead and run the agent configuration interface, and we can see that this guy is set here. So as you can see here, here's a little different. The requires import of authentication key. So that's a little different step than what we did with the Linux install. So, and let me show you what we can do with that. So on the manager, and this is kind of the older way of doing things, but they have a binary where we can basically create an agent that we want to register, and the manager will output us this authentication key that it'll use to verify. So they're going to var osec bin ls, and if I run this manage agents, you can see we have a few options here. So we're going to do A for add an agent. We're going to do a name for the host, and I'll just give it Windows _agent. IP address, again, I like to use any. and confirm adding it, and yes. Now you see it's asking for a key here within our GUI here. So let's go ahead and extract a key with the E flag, and now it's asking provide the ID. So ID of my Windows agent is 002, and now we have this generated key. So I'll go ahead and grab that and paste it here. And then I also need to point to the IP address of my manager. So we will go ahead and do that here. So I'll go ahead and save that. Adding, we can see it's adding a key. We'll go to manage and let's start. And it has started. And let's see if now we are up and running with this guy. So let's run a agent control, I think it was. Yeah, let's list active agents with the LC flag. So we're listing active agents, and as we can see, our Windows guy is now active and is forwarding logs to our Wazoo manager. And kind of the same thing, we can view our config of this guy. And this is also running as a service. So if I open up my services within my Windows host here and scroll down to Wazoo, I see that we are up and running. So, you know, in the event where maybe you're having to do some troubleshooting, all of a sudden this agent became inactive for some reason, you're trying to figure out why. First kind of basic troubleshooting to go into is make sure that the service is running correctly. And you can do that here. So I could right click and stop or start in the event. And we open up our config. So if we, like I said, we get the UI, so it's a little more friendly. And we can view the config of our osec.conf as well. So you can see that we've pointed to our manager, so it's populated that for us. And here you can see our log files that we send look a little different, right? So this is sending off of Windows event rather than, you know, var log messages, var log secure like you see on Linux distributions. You know, Windows logs everything to their event manager. And so we're then specifying forwarding of event IDs, and these event IDs are, you know, like login attempts, file modifications. So when a file's hash value changes, you know, that's what's getting logged here. So if we go into, let's actually go into Event Viewer here and get a kind of a better understanding of what we're looking at here. So if I go into Windows Logs Security, as you can see the locate, so we're looking at the event channel, which corresponds to the event viewer, and we're under the security location. So you also see the system location, and that corresponds to what we see here. So we're forwarding security logs, or we're also forwarding system logs. Some videos down the road we'll get into how we can configure syslog. Syslog is like a log collection for Windows on steroids. It takes advantage of the event viewer platform here, but it logs so much more in depth, and we can use that to get a better understanding of, you know, network connections that are made, a lot more robust data around what's going on our Windows server. But for now, with default, we get the security logs and the system logs. So looking at the security logs, we also see like these event IDs 4656, for example. So let's see if we can search for oh, here we go, filter, event sources. Let's look at event ID. What did I say? 4656. 4656. Let's see if we have any. We don't. Let's see if we have. Let's just clear the filter and see what we do have. So, okay, this 4625 I see. Oh, excuse me. So here we're forwarding all events except for event IDs not equal to 5145. Sorry, I was overlooking that. So we're forwarding everything. So for example, you see like a logon. An account, a logon attempt has a event ID of 4625. We don't see that here because we're sending everything within this except for specific event IDs that Wazoo has that comes pre-bundled, doesn't care about, or just kind of filler alerts. So we'll overlook those. But when we look in the logs here in a sec that we're sending to the manager, we'll see some of these corresponding event IDs. And then you can get some more kind of details around that. So an account failed to log on. User local group membership was enumerated. So that doesn't sound good. So let's go ahead and jump to our manager and see what alerts we are firing. So if we open our alerts.json, and let me go ahead and just grep for this Windows guy. So we're only seeing his logs. And let me see if I can replicate the same test here. So let me open up another attempt here and create. And let me just do a crappy password. And we got the unknown user or bad password login attempt. As we just saw, I inputted a bad password to try to remote desktop on to my Windows box. It generated the log alert locally within the event viewer and then sent it to my Wazoo manager, evaluated it against its rule set and said, oh yeah, this matches this rule here, log on failure. So let's go ahead and alert on that. This is ugly, right? I don't want to be tailing this alerts.json file to view what's an alert and what's not. And that's where Elasticsearch and Kibana really come into play. So that's going to be the topic of our next video. So go ahead and jump on over to that, and I will see y'all there.
And as always, let me know down below what you liked or disliked about this video, any errors I may have made, as well as recommendations for other open source tools you think I should explore.